Okay, so essentially we just look at the major expenditure initiatives, the major revenue policies, and an economic update and the outlook and the fiscal performance and the debt. We had a huge focus on families, as you know, through the budget. And of course, we build upon the previous budgets as far as the continuation of focus on spending on infrastructure development, education, health, and access to water, electricity, and social protection. We believe we need to bring up, continue to build strong macroeconomic fundamentals and fiscal strength. Parenthood assistance, we give $1,000 to every child that's born. The account gets opened in the child's name. The mother is the one who's the person who can operate the account. It obviously is applicable to only families that earn less than $30,000. Oh, sorry, the PS Economy is there too, who I did not see. For families that earn less than $30,000 a year. One of the reasons why we've also done this is because obviously to provide assistance, but also to ensure that people register their children at birth. A few years ago we did a sweep. We found that something like 24 to 25,000 Fijians did not even have a birth certificate. Some of them in fact went up to the ages of 45, 55, and they went throughout half their lives or 3/4 of their life without even having a birth certificate. So this also helps people to get registered at birth. We similarly find a lot of parents don't register their children until they go to class 1 or about to go to class 1. This is why we open the BDM offices late into the evening and on Saturdays, etc. Maternity leave has increased from 84 working days to 98 working days, which is effective from 1st of January 2019. Brings us in alignment with many other countries. We have a new leave, a paternity leave, essentially for the fathers of babies who can now take 5 days leave, either during the maternity leave period with their partners or post the birth itself. We've also introduced 5 days of family care leave. Again, this leave is different to and specific for 5 days family care leave. So for example, if I'm working and my child gets sick, it gets hospitalized and somebody needs to spend time with him, then I can take those 5 days off and I get paid for that too. But in order to assist employers with this new leave, should they be paying out, of course, paternity leave and family care leave, they can have 150% tax deduction for the wages and salaries that actually they pay out for those 2 specific leaves that's now available and is provided for now under the Employment Relations Act. You will have a chance to ask questions as we proceed. Our funding for education is a huge level of funding provided for education. We're spending about $1.035 billion in the education sector. It's about 22% of the total budget spend. How is that money spent? $535.4 million goes to the Ministry of Education. Ministry of Education, as you know, employs over 10,000 teachers, and these teachers teach in community-run schools, faith-based schools. So all the salaries are paid by the Ministry of Education. They pay for the textbooks, they pay for the school fees, etc. All the high school and primary school students, and of course EC, also the bus fares, etc. All of that comes through that $535.4 million. Then, of course, we give monies to higher education institutions. We have, of course, the 2 components of it. One of them is an operating grant, the other one is a capital grant. As far as the operating grants are concerned, there's about $104.8 million, and that's how it's broken down. USP gets $33 million, University of Fiji 4.2, FNU 65.1, and various other organizations, Corpus Christi, Fulton College, Montfort, the 2 Montfort schools, Sangam and Vivekananda Technical College. Now, these assessments actually for these institutions are done by the Higher Education Commission. They have a particular formula that's actually applied. One thing to note also that FNU is a fully funded government higher education institution. They don't have any other source of funding. Whereas organizations like USP, for example, we are the highest contributor as far as sovereign contribution is concerned, but other Pacific Island countries also contribute to that, including on a bilateral basis like Australia, New Zealand, and various other countries, including the Japanese. As far as capital grants are concerned, the entire capital grant goes to FNU. One of them, of course, is to build a new Lambasa campus, upgrade of Lasino campus. We're putting new vet labs, hospital and livestock shed at the agricultural school in Coronivia, and they're getting $4 million. And the Maritime Academy, which is down here in Lodala Bay, getting an upgrade of many of the equipment and also the buildings there, so they're getting $5 million. We have a payment to make of $90 million in terms of the rehabilitation of the schools. A lot of them have come from the Winston rebuild, and of course also the Gita and Josie impact that some of the schools, of course, schools like in Kandavu and various other areas that got damaged as a result of the climatic events earlier on this year. National Toppers is costing us in this financial year $43.8 million, and the Tertiary Education Loan Scheme, which also includes the payment of not just of university fees, but also allowances. And so that's costing us $205.6 million this year. Civil service scholarships, we've introduced some new scholarships. There's about $2.3 million, and other scholarships training about $7.2 million, and I'll show you the breakdown of that. We've increased the number of toppers from the current 630, which I should not say current anymore. It used to be 630 in the 2017-2018 budget. Now the 2018-2019 budget, the number of scholarships has increased to 950. As you know, our TEL scholarships has a skewed inclination towards science subjects. So there's a shortage of people in the science areas in Fiji. So about 70 to 80% of all the scholarships we give are more skewed towards the science areas, like doctors, nurses, marine scientists, foresters, etc. And of course, town planning and respective other areas. We've introduced a new scholarship scheme, which is for those living year 13, and they get enrolled in courses overseas, and those courses actually aren't available in Fiji. So for example, if I left high school and I wanted to do architecture, there's no university in Fiji that offers an architectural course, undergraduate course in architecture. Of course, there are other areas like customs, forensic science, meteorology, biomedical engineering, town planning, clinical psychologists, all of these areas. There's a shortage of people in these areas in Fiji. And of course, there are people who do want to study in these areas. Currently, well, prior to this budget being announced, people in the 2017-2018, if a student wanted to go overseas and study in these areas, they could not do so. But now we've allocated about 20 positions for those. Of course, there'll be a lot of competition for this. So altogether, we have now 970 what we call the Toppers Awards as far as the education sector is concerned. We of course have TELS, which continues, and TELS is applicable to anybody that gets a place in university, in any university in Fiji. And then if they say that they cannot pay for their fees, then we actually pay for their fees too. If they now have a family that earns less than $50,000 a year, they also are eligible for TELS allowances, which is living allowances, textbook allowances, traveling allowances, etc. We've introduced a new also awards for teachers. There's a shortage of teachers at a degree level in these areas. In maths, physics, in fact, we'll run out of maths and physics teachers in a few years' time if we don't upgrade them. Maths, physics, language and literature in English, information technology, industrial arts, special education, early childhood. We have a lot of good teachers who only have diploma qualifications. So we want them to get a degree qualification so they can get better salaries, etc., but also to hone in their skills in these areas. We are also offering now at a postgraduate level 20 awards for teachers holding a bachelor's degree. They're already holding a bachelor's degree, for them to go and do, for example, a master's degree or PhD in the areas of maths, physics, language and literature, so they can then upgrade. I remember in our days when we were in Marist, we had teachers who had masters in English who used to teach us. It's very rare now to find, for example, a teacher in high school level with masters teaching high school students. We want to bring back that level of competency and proficiency in the high school system. Now, we're also offering 10 overseas awards for postgrad studies in these areas: teacher training, tourism, agriculture, fisheries and forestry. Now, these ones, it's also available to those outside the civil service. So, for example, if I am somebody working in fisheries or forestry or in the tourism sector, I can actually get a master's award to go overseas and study and further my knowledge in the tourism sector. Out of these 40 awards, 20 are reserved for civil servants and 20 is for the private sector. We also have 10 awards for PhD, which are 5 of which are reserved for civil servants. Very rare to find civil servants in Fiji with PhDs. There's 1 or 2, but not that many. Very rare to also find civil servants with specific qualifications in masters in specific areas, which we want, of course, to enhance that level of knowledge with the civil service, so they obviously can give good advice to the policy makers. We have now, of course, we started a scholarship for special students, so people with hearing impairment, disabilities. We started paying their fees, but they weren't entitled to the same level of allowances that other students who were getting allowance on the TELS were entitled to. So now we've upgraded them to get the same level of allowances. So full scholarships with the full allowances to be paid. We made a couple of changes in the TELS section, as you know, that I just highlighted earlier on. So now if your parental income is $50,000, then you can get TELS allowances also. So we pay for your bus fares, we pay for your living allowance, textbooks, etc. We've also increased the bus fare allowance to $30 a week. We have students that travel, for example, to FNU, say from Navua or Nasori to Suva or Mba to Latoka, so they're able to get more on bus fares in that. There's a shortage of doctors in Fiji. We also recognize the fact that there are some people who may have already got a qualification but want to get an MBBS. Generally, these people tend to be those who may have a science degree or may have already done pharmacy, etc., so they can get some cross credits. So we've got 30 what we call graduate positions that are now reserved for these people through the Fiji School of Medicine, which is of course under FSM. Under FNU. Now we've been, studying this for a few years now, where we've been looking at the loan payment system for students, because obviously the reality is, ladies and gentlemen, that when you do give TELS, give as a loan, you cannot actually give free university education to everybody in Fiji. 50% of the population in Fiji is currently 27 years or younger than 27 years old. 70% of the population is below the age of 40. But because we have got a population of 50% being 27 years or younger, obviously it means that a lot more people will be going through the schooling system. And when you also have a young population, it means in a few years' time, you also have a lot of people giving birth too, because young people produce babies. So when you have more babies being produced, obviously you have a requirement for them to go to school. So it is unsustainable. I've heard people say, oh, we'll make university, all free. It's unsustainable to do that. Already the debt accumulated from TELS and scholarships, etc., is over $700 million. So you cannot sustain that. I mean, people are making this as a political ploy. They don't talk about higher education, but they only talk about universities because university students actually vote. So what we have said is that we've looked at the payment system, that if you, for example, if I did say a bachelor's of education, and assuming that I picked up all the full TELS allowances, living allowance, bus fare allowance, textbook allowance, my debt would be approximately about $34,000, Sherry? $36,000. Now, what we are saying is that you, of course, will pay only 20% from your salary towards that loan. You can't pay anything more than that. But what we are saying now is that if you accelerate your TELS repayment and you pay 50% of that $36,000 in 3 years or less, we will forgive the rest of the 50% because you paid your loan sooner. Now, why have we done that? Obviously, it becomes less burdensome, but more so, because if we string that loan out for the next 10, 15 years, obviously the dollar value of that will be far less than what we actually paid. And also, we need the funds to be able to ensure that we fund the kids that are coming after them. So it's sustainable. We need to have sustainability built into the system. Now, one thing a lot of the people who outside the government are not talking about are high schools. There's still a lot of high schools that are substandard. There are schools, for example, in Bua I've recently been to, they don't even have a computer. They don't have science labs. So we need these high schools, we need these primary schools to be up at the same level, at the same par as the schools, for example, in the urban areas. That's where we want to put a lot of focus on. And so we need to have funds going forward to ensure it's not just universities we are focused on, we are focused at the primary and secondary schools, because when these kids come through there and they have a solid base, they'll do much better at universities. We have students coming into universities that have never seen a computer, never used one. In fact, what is really funny is that recently when we have OMRS for teachers, one of the requirements is that the teachers, when they go sit their tests, etc., when they go for the interviews, we look at the level of competency in computers. They need to know that. And the unions are saying to us, no, there should not be a requirement, it should be an option. In this day and age, of course, people need to know how to use computers. It also helps you not just for your teaching ability, but also your management of a school. So this is what we call the Accelerated Repayment Initiative. Now, the other things, very quickly, we've formed the new Ministry of Housing and Community Development. The rate of home ownership in Fiji is very low, and people tend to buy their first homes normally in the late 30s or 40s, etc. So we need to, in fact, inculcate the idea or engender the idea that people need to start buying their homes at an early age. We need to make it available to them. Funding needs to be made available. As you know, already the interest rates have quite significantly come down. And what we've also said that in this respect, we need people to also change their concept of what is a home. Now, if you go overseas, for them a home is not necessarily always a block of land with a house on it. A home can be, for example, if this were to be strata title apartments, this can be one house. You have your room, you have your bedrooms, you have your kitchen and what have you, and I buy my title. I can get a 99-year lease, and that's my home. It could be my first home, my first one-bedroom home, my first two-bedroom home. The idea is to make it affordable. Once it becomes affordable, then you have an asset. There are many people in Fiji who, only get an asset once they get very old, or in their late 30s or late 40s. And as a result of that, when they want to access credit, they aren't able to access credit, so they go to money lenders. There are many people who go to money lenders in Fiji. So if we're able to make homes affordable and our concept of home changes, and that is owning strata title units, then we'll be able to get much better savings. People will be a lot more tuned in respect of not just saving, but also having an asset base, so we don't go to money lenders, etc. So what we say over here, that if you earn $50,000 or less, you go through a bank, a financial institution, including, for example, Housing Authority or any of the mainstream banks, and you apply for a loan to, for example, build a home. They approve the loan, will then contribute $15,000 towards the building of your home. They give it as a grant. It's not a loan. It's a grant. It simply goes towards the construction of your home. If you want to buy a home, we give $10,000. We skewed more towards construction, obviously, because construction creates a lot more activity within the economy. Now, we've also said, you'll see the advertisements in the Fiji Sun, I think it's also there today's papers, and most certainly it was there yesterday's papers, that if you actually also buy a home from a approved strata title developer, we'll treat it as you building it. So we'll contribute $15,000 as opposed to $10,000. If you earn more than $50,000 but less than $100,000, you qualify for $10,000 for construction of a home and $5,000 for the purchase of the home. There are a lot of people, for example, who want to access land, in particular through lease, Itaukia land lease or state land lease, and they have to pay, they have to buy the lease. So normally the payments are, $10,000, $20,000. You get the lease, and then of course you do your yearly lease repayments. So, there may be some people who, for example, could be a person who's working. He wants to be able to get a lease. The TLTB is willing to lease the land to them, but they need $15,000 up front. So here we come in and we actually contribute $10,000 as long as your income is less than $50,000, and the money will be paid directly to TLTB or the Department of Lands or Ministry of Lands. Last year, we had an arrangement with the Reserve Bank of Fiji. So Reserve Bank of Fiji currently has been lending at 1% interest rate to banks who apply for subsidized housing loans. So the banks will lend generally at 1%, the Reserve Bank will lend at 1% to a bank, and then the banks charge an interest rate of 5% or less. So I go along, I'm a low-income earner, I get a loan application that's approved, and under that scheme I will pay an interest rate of, say, maybe 4.5%, 4.2%. Now, if I do that, what we've done now, we've topped it up. We're saying we'll reduce another 1% for you. So we'll subsidize that 1%. So assuming the bank gives me a loan for 4.8%, I will now pay 3.8% for the first 3 years. This is to incentivize people to buy their first home. We also, there's quite a few places where people have been actually living on land for a long period of time, in particular Itaukia land or Crown land, etc., where the land has not been surveyed. And as a result of the land not being surveyed, they have not received a proper title on that land. So they cannot go to the bank and mortgage the land and build a nice concrete home, etc. So we've said we'll pay for the cost of the land surveys. It's a very practical solution. If you go to places like in Vudi, Nosori, lots of homes there, they don't actually have a proper title because the land has not been surveyed. So we'll pay for the cost of that, and we simply put in an application. It's available through all the legal aid offices. You can go there and we'll actually then process it through the Ministry of Housing, sorry. We have, as you know, we used to have a 1/3, 2/3 contribution. This is mainly in the rural areas for social housing. We're actually redeveloping the policy in that area. We're making further announcements in respect of that. Of course, we continue with the issuance of proper lease to Fijians in informal settlements. A lot of informal settlements, whether in Tauke land or Crown land or state land, and we're actually developing those. Now, just restructure of FNTC levy. One point I wanted to make. Sorry, one second. You know, at the moment, for example, if you feel sick, you wake up in the morning and you get a bit of a flu and you want to actually go to work, but you need a doctor to see you, and you cannot afford to go and visit a private doctor, you go to CWM or you go to a health center before you go to work in the morning. And generally, when you go to a public hospital in the morning, you'll find there's a very long queue. And majority of the people who are actually at the hospitals don't have any, what we may call a serious medical condition. It could be run-of-the-mill cold and flu, or maybe somebody's got a small cut, they want a dressing. We are changing that, so from the 1st of January, next year, you can go to your local GP, your general practitioner in your suburb. You go to the local doctor, so I've got the flu, the local doctor sees me and she gives me a prescription, and I can go off to work or get my, my medicine and go home and sleep. I don't need to go anymore to the hospital, so that you avoid the queues. You also then develop what we call a family doctor situation. Because, if you continue to go to the same doctor in your locality, you may go there, your spouse may go there, your children will go there. And if you live in there for a number of years, they actually know your family history. So they know what's the situation, what's the medical condition of the family. So for you to go and pay those visits, we will pay for that. The government will pay for that visit to the GP. Of course, we need to agree on the fees, and that's something we're working out with the Asian Development Bank that's actually helping us to come up with the policy scheme. We have what we call capitation rates that will be set with doctors. The other reason also we want to use GPs is also, apart from reducing the queues, etc., is that there are many parts of Fiji where there are no doctors at all. If you go to Korovo town, there's no private doctor, there's no GP. If you go to Nambuwalu, there's no private doctor. You go to Nasarawanga, there's no private doctor. You go to, for example, I think even Senganga, there's no private doctor. Somebody may come once a week or whatever it is. So by having, these facilities available, and we've got actually a scheme built into the budget, that will also fund doctors to go to those areas and set them up. So they will provide a service. The service will be a lot quicker, people will get much better quality service, medical treatment very quickly. Now, how are we going to pay for it? Now, obviously, you can't pull money out of thin air. Currently, all employers pay 1% of their salary bill, 1% of the wages and salaries they pay to their staff, 1% of that by law, they have to pay towards FNTC. That's what you call the FNTC levy. That's been happening for a number of years. The FNTC levy has got a trust, it's got already about $30 million built into it. So the way the system works is when you pay the 1%, and you then, for example, provide in-house training or even external training to your staff, you can then claim back monies from that contributions you have made. So we have what we call Method A and Method B. It's Method A and Method B categories of employers. A lot of the Method B people don't even claim it back. So this has been in place for a few decades now, where you contribute 1% of that. So what we've said now, going forward from the 1st of Jan, they will continue to pay that, but it will be used in a different manner. We collect approximately $21 million a year from this FNTC levy. So 50% of the 20 million will go towards funding your visits to the GPs. That's what the money will be used for. And then 40% of that will go towards workers' comp. At the moment, all employers have to have, or should have, I should say, should have workers' compensation. So owners of JJ's in the park are here. One of the staff is working over here. They fall down the steps, break their back. They're supposed to have that covered because they've got injured at work. They're supposed to have workers' compensation. Unfortunately, many employers in Fiji don't have workers' comp. They don't at all. If I'm working in a factory, I'm putting the timber through the machine and I put my finger in, my finger gets chopped off, then there's always the issue under the old law, whose fault was it, what was the contribution, the contributory part of the employee as opposed to the employer perhaps not providing the right safety environment, etc. You get into that, it becomes very litigious. And it takes years to solve the problems. So we are introducing what we call the no-fault system from the 1st of Jan of next year. If I'm at work, my finger gets chopped off, nobody's going to ask me whose fault was it. I get paid an amount for it. That's how the system works in countries like New Zealand, Australia, etc. So I get paid out the amount. And there's obviously a published rate of different limbs of your body, the cost of it. So if I'm right-handed and I lose my right wrist, obviously my compensation would be a lot higher than if I lost my left wrist, because I'm right-handed. So it's very quick, there's no need for lawyers to get involved, and it's a system that's quite fair. Of course, that needs to be funded too. So 40% of that will come from the $20 million. Now, the 10% that's left, of course, will continue with the FNTC levy system. You know, with the ACCF, we've introduced third-party insurance. It's working really well now. Before, for example, if your child, was crossing the street and ran in front of the bus, and there's a oncoming car and hits the child and gets injured or dies, then you probably won't get paid because it's the child's fault under the old laws. Of course, now it's changed from the 1st of Jan. You simply get a paid out because it was a road accident. We've also introduced what we call bundle insurance for civil servants and also in particular for social welfare recipients. Now it's costing us only $5 million, but it's actually something that protects government too. Assuming that you have somebody who's receiving poverty benefit scheme or somebody who's a pensioner, etc., they may already be in a situation where they cannot afford to pay for other things too. We're giving them some funding. So if, for example, I'm receiving poverty welfare benefit and I die, it would be very difficult for my family to, for example, meet various expenses. So things like funeral expenses are covered, and the family will get paid out $3,000 upon death. I may leave somebody behind. Or, for example, if our house catches fire. I mean, invariably what happens when people are low income, their house catches fire, they obviously always come to government and say, can you help us because, I've lost everything. In this way, we've got ourselves covered too now, because we're actually paying for insurance premium. So, it works out best for everybody. So we've got that covered. It's a very, it's not a phenomenal large amount of money, but it's already worked for. Sugarcane farmers are now covered under this scheme. Rice farmers, dairy farmers, copra farmers, they're all covered under this scheme. So we've now extended this to people who are receiving social pension and also people who are civil servants and people in the police force and the military. And also, of course, people who are in the correction services. We are currently working with the RBF and the ADB and World Bank in developing some products for insurance for homes from cyclone ravages. Currently, as you know, after Cyclone Winston and also after Josie and Kenny, we've actually had to fork out money from government coffers to pay people to rebuild their homes. It cost us over $110 million in the last one, cost us $125 million in the last one. If you get another cyclone, we cannot keep on doing this all the time because it's unbudgeted for, it also is unpredictable, it can be very expensive. So we're looking obviously at developing insurance products. Now, insurance is very difficult. Of course, many people who own buildings would tell you, currently, under the current code, for you to get a cyclone coverage is very expensive to get it. Many people cannot actually afford to do so, to get cyclone certification. So what we're saying, even for people with low income, we need to have some kind of basic cover. The one that actually does work is what we call parametric insurance. Parametric insurance, the way it works is, for example, you have a set value that's paid out in the event of a climatic event. So you may say you've got a cover for cyclone. So everybody, for example, in this area will be covered, in this room will be covered. If the cyclone goes down this path, then everybody that lives within this path will get a payout. And they get a set amount. We don't actually go and individually assess homes. So premium is made. That's how parametric insurance works. Similarly, we're developing it for crop insurance, and we hope to actually launch this before November of this year, keeping our fingers crossed. We've allocated about $1 million in the budget this year to pay for low-income people to have premium for their premiums and also get insurance cover, and also for crop insurance we allocated $350,000. Huge incentivization in the digital sector. As you know, we've investing quite a lot of money, $40 million in the ICT sector. We believe the ICT sector is really of great benefit to Fiji. If you see most of the young people in Fiji, they're always with these things all the time. They say they will develop neck problems because everybody's head is down all the time. But this park, Sukuna Park, is now a Wi-Fi hotspot area. It's what we call is geo-fenced. In other words, you can't get that level of speed and bandwidth if you're going to stay near Fintel or beyond that. It's only within this area. So we're trying to create spaces where young people in particular and others can come and use their phones, get Wi-Fi speeds and internet, and bandwidth at a lot better speeds and rates compared to other places, creating safe spots, and also they get 1 hour free of Wi-Fi usage. So we're doing that throughout Fiji in various places. Of course, it gives you the opportunity to download, upload things, and we want more people to be connected using social media. Unfortunately, we have seen that many people use social media for very negative things, but nonetheless, we hope to that people get mature as we go along and use that more for beneficial purposes than anything else, and sharing of information. We've also launching a number of platforms for mobile phone apps for government services. So we're looking currently at the moment through the BDM. You should be able to give your baby's details online through your phone to BDM to make things a lot easier and quicker. Tying up with Fiji Revenue and Customs Services, FNPF, etc. Wailesi, of course, we're doing free-to-air television. So today you can watch free-to-air television right down on the southern tip of Lau, in Rotuma, and Dikumbia. Some places, of course, you need to put the dish. Other places you don't need to. You simply have the aerial. They're building about 19 different sites across Fiji, building redundancy. So if there's a cyclone, nothing falls over. You continue to get the signal. And what they're also using is what they call both terrestrial linkage and also satellite linkage. Terrestrial is basically when your signal speaks from tower to tower. Then sometimes if you, for example, have a village or a house right in the gully, the frequency won't reach it. So that's when you use satellite technology. So the signal goes from the tower to the satellite, and then you beam it down to whichever household has the dish. And of course you can buy that. Once you get Wailesi, you then don't have to actually subscribe. You get 8 channels for the time being for free. And of course that can continue to expand. All the FNU campuses will again become Wi-Fi hotspots. As we said, that FNU, some people consider it to be the probably poorer cousin of USP. We need to ensure that FNU's capacity increases. The students, of course, get better services. So that should be launched by next week. There's 24 campuses of FNU, and all of them will be Wi-Fi hotspotted. Now, promoting electronic transactions. This is very important for us. As you know, at the moment, if I go to, say, the supermarket, or if I want to stay at a hotel, but generally point of sale is at supermarkets and various other places. So assuming I buy $100 worth of groceries, and I don't have $100, I use my ATM card, I want to pay for it. When I swipe the card, the bank will charge me 40 cents a transaction. They charge the merchant 30 cents a transaction. So they make 70 cents on one sale. Now, what we want obviously is more people to use electronic transactions. And we want more merchants to have more point of sale machines. Because by having electronic transactions, it's a lot more convenient for you. You don't have to carry cash. The shops don't have to do additional banking, because when you give cash, they physically have to go and bank it. But when they electronically transfer the funds, it immediately goes into their accounts. The other point, of course, is we can keep good track of money so these people know how much tax you should pay. That's very important too. But the other overall issue is this. You see, for example, if I'm an ANZ card holder, I go and swipe my card, and the money that immediately gets transferred from my ANZ account to the shopkeeper's account. And maybe the shopkeeper's account is with Westpac. So simply electronically gets transferred from ANZ to Westpac. The money does not come out of the system. It stays within the banking system. Now, when the money stays within the banking system, it means there's cash is still in the system. It's not physically, it's not taken out. So when there's more cash, when there's more liquidity in the system, the cost of buying that cash is less. In other words, if you go and borrow a loan, the interest rate will be less. But if more and more people physically take out the money, there'll be less cash in the system, and therefore the banks will charge you a high interest rate because there's less cash in the system. So more electronic transactions we have, more cash remains within the system, the interest rates get cheaper, more people can have access to credit, and of course we have better track of where the transactions are taking place. So what we have said, the banks have come in agreement with us. So from the 1st of Jan of next year, when you go and swipe your card, they won't charge the 40 cents. No fee for the customer. The merchants, still 30 cents. We are talking to them at the moment. We've made some funding available to try and work a form of subsidy for the merchants. So instead of, for example, them paying 30 cents, they may have to pay 5 cents. That's something that we are working with them at the moment. And we hope to have that online too. The other thing is also we have made an allocation in our budget to subsidize the purchase of point-of-sale machine. A point-of-sale machine costs about 500 Australian dollars. It's about 750 Fijian dollars. Now, we obviously want the corner shop to have a point-of-sale machine. In Fiji at the moment, if you want to go and buy, say, a bottle of water from the shop using an ATM card, they'll tell you to bugger off. Because they have a minimum sale of $10. That's what most people say, because they say then it's worth it. I can walk into a 7-Eleven store in New Zealand and buy a bottle of water with my ATM card. In fact, I've done that. So we want that situation to be happening in Fiji too. It can only happen if we inculcate that idea of all shops to actually have point-of-sale machines. So what we're saying, we've allocated some funding to subsidize. So we'll pay 50% of the cost of more shops to have a point-of-sale machine. So more convenient for you, more electronic transactions, and of course, have higher levels of liquidity in the system. Improving health and medical services. We're investing quite a lot, of course, in building new facilities. We're building, for example, a subdivisional hospital in KSC, upgrading Valelevu, various other medical facilities and centers. We're buying more equipment. We're buying a second MRI machine. And we, of course, have now, we've been looking at the kidney dialysis treatment issue for quite some time. As you know, that we announced in the last budget that we're setting up a kidney research center that will be set up in Tamavua. There's been some delays with that in the last budget, but they will get the work starting off in that. But apart from that, we also have now the setting up of 2 kidney dialysis centers. One will be in Nandera, which is the one that's stated is Suva, and one will be in Nandi. And those people that actually need dialysis and earn less than $30,000 a year will pay 50% of the cost. But the dialysis centers over here, your cost will be $150. So if we pay 50%, you'll be paying $75 a visit. We have Dr. Krishnan, who is the only nephrologist in Fiji and indeed in the South Pacific, who is actually working very closely with us. And he said there's approximately about probably 600 potential people who need access to dialysis. Of course, a number of them also earn more than $30,000 a year. Free medicine program, that will continue, but one of the things that we have changed now, the pharmacies will bill government. Before we used to give them the stockpile of medicine, now they'll stock it themselves and they'll simply bill us at the end of the month. We're setting up a public-private partnership for Ba and Lautoka hospitals. We've recently, the PS and Shiri and I were recently in India. There's a number of interested parties. We're going through the World Bank and IFC to set up a PPP arrangement. We have various procedures in Sydney that are not, in Fiji, that are not available. So God forbid if any one of us has a heart attack now and you need a bypass surgery, there's no doctor in Fiji that can do that. There's no open heart surgeon in Fiji. So, unless of course you get somebody visiting. So that's why a lot of people go overseas. They go to Australia, they go to New Zealand. A lot of them go to India because of costs. So they go there for open heart surgery. So one of the requirements in the PPP that whoever is going to come and set up or partner with FNPF in this PPP must actually provide 24/7 open heart surgery facilities. They must also provide, for example, things in the treatment of cancer, chemotherapy. You need to have oncology. And part of the deal is also they'll build a new wing at the Lautoka Hospital with new operating theatres, with viewing areas, so our doctors, our would-be doctors, our interns can actually learn, and we actually increase that capacity. So we want, in 10, 15 years' time, because that's how long it actually takes to get cardiovascular surgeons, we want the Fijian doctors to become open-heart surgeons. Of course, some of them have become open-heart surgeons, but they don't practice in Fiji anymore because the medical system did not allow them to do so. People weren't getting promoted on merit, and or the salaries were very, very low. So a lot of them have actually gone away and become, open-heart surgeons overseas. Very quickly, sugar and agriculture. We've got Ministry of Sugar, is getting, again, providing various subsidies, in the weedicide subsidy, fertilizer subsidy. I don't want to dwell too much on this, but the point to make is this. Our approach has been with the sugarcane industry, in terms of giving assurance to the farmers, we want to ensure that the input cost of producing a ton of cane is actually reduced. There's no point saying we'll give you $150 a ton or $100 a ton when the cost of producing that cane will be, say, $90. What's the point of getting $100 a ton if it costs you $90 to produce it? So we would rather you have a more realistic amount as to how much you'll get per ton, but your cost of production is actually reduced. And that is by also, of course, providing subsidies such as what we've got here. We also have now said that the $85 per ton will be given for the next 3 years to all sugarcane farmers. And the reason why we can do that is because there's a stabilization fund that's been set up with government and FSC working together. So you have the way stabilization funds work is that, for example, if the world market price, we get $87 a ton, the farmers will get 85 and the $2 is actually kept for the next year. So if next year the world market price, say, goes down to $65 a ton, the farmers will still get $85. So, and we'll pay through the stabilization fund the difference. And that's what a lot of countries do in the agricultural sector. So of course in Fiji, we've also increased the budget funding to $96.8 million. These are two areas that we're quite excited about. One is, of course, building the local goat meat industry. A lot of people, in Fiji eat goat. It's a lean meat, it's a healthy meat, and it's a meat that's eaten across Fiji. Now, just to tell you, demonstrate to you what we are doing, if tomorrow Crest closed down, and say Red Rooster's closed down, we won't have any chicken meat in Fiji. We'll have to import all the chicken from overseas. That's a fact. So you have one company, and of course subsequently Rooster came into the scene, that has made us self-sufficient in chicken meat. Now what Crest has done prior to Crest coming on board, if you want a chicken, you have to drive down to somebody's house and buy a chicken and kill it in the yard and what have you. Now you can go to the supermarket and buy frozen chicken. We should be able to buy goat meat in supermarkets also. It's very rarely you find goat meat in the supermarkets. You don't. So we need to grow or create a goat meat industry. So what we need to do is follow the similar model, for example, what Crest does. Crest does not have or grow all the chickens it sells. Crest actually goes out to villages, it goes to farmers and says, look, here's 200 chicks, you grow these 200 chicks, and I'll buy it off you after 36 weeks at this many dollars. You say, fine, I'll make a margin with it, I'll do that. That's how most of the meat supply comes to Crest. So Crest does the processing, Crest actually slaughters the chicken, it cleans the chicken, it freezes the chicken and sells it in the supermarkets. We can do a similar thing with goats. And we need to be able to provide alternative forms of meat also. People like eating meat in Fiji. Now, there is, for example, a farm between Ba and Tavua. They've already got 1,000 goats. They have the ability to go and give baby goats or kids to villages and farmers to grow the goats and say, we'll come back after 18 months, 2 years, whatever it is, the time it takes to grow a kid into a healthy goat. Then they'll pay them a particular price, a source of income for them, but also we'll have goat meat available in our supermarkets. We've had, of course, the dairy industry has been hit by tuberculosis and brucellosis in the dairy industry. And so what we've been doing in Fiji, for example, if there's a farm, there's about 4 or 5 cows that have been affected. They kill those cows and then we continue to deal with it. What they've done in countries like New Zealand, for example, in New Zealand, what they do is if the farm has been affected, they cull all the cows. Kill it outright, clean out the pasture, and then you start afresh. In that way, you don't get much contamination. That's one of the things that we need to do, and that's what the money that's been set aside for that. We continue with civil service reform. Of course, we introduced performance management systems in the civil service, and they'll get assessed by the end of this year, early next year, and get backdated to 1st of August. We've increased the salaries for people who work at Itauke Affairs Board and also provincial councils in alignment with the civil service reforms that have taken place. Now, so what are the major revenue policy changes? As you know, for example, if you stay at this hotel, if you stay at a hotel, if you rent a car, if you go and watch a movie, if you go and eat at an expensive restaurant, you go and drink beer at a pub or wine or whatever it is, you have to pay STT and ECAL. That's what you have to pay. Now, well, the announcement we made is that those businesses that have a gross turnover of $1.25 million or less, they no longer will have to pay STT and ECAL. It's basically to help smaller businesses and for them to grow. So, for example, if I'm running 4 or 5, room units, a small motel, I no longer will have to pay that because I don't make $1.25 million. So we're exempting them from that. But just to remind you, with ECAL, you got the ECAL brochure? With ECAL, when we passed the new law last year and introduced ECAL, under that system, by law, we have to ensure that all the funds collected from ECAL and STT actually only is spent on environmental or climate adaptation measures. So we actually have to do that. Normally when government collects taxes, they put it into the pot of money and they use it whichever way they like. All the money is collected from ECAL has to be accounted for specifically only for environmental and climate adaptation measures. So we have to publish this, and you can find this. It's also available on our website. It says where the money has gone to, which water project, which electricity project, which village has been moved to higher ground, where have been rebuilds done, etc. So that's available there. And that's what the money from ECAL is used for. Of course, now, as I highlighted earlier on, if an employer pays salaries or wages to an employee, when they've taken up paternity leave or family care leave, they can claim a tax deduction of 150%. Also, of course, if an employer also trains their staff, the cost of the staff training, they can claim 150% tax deduction to encourage more in-house training. You can get a 250% tax deduction if you incur expenditure on research and development in ICT and renewable energy, because that's the two areas that we very much focus on. Of course, this can extend to other areas also. And ICT, as I've said, we see a lot of future in this. Just very quickly to tell you a story, when one of the ICT companies set up a call center in Fiji, and we gave them incentive, so we gave them a rebate on every dollar that they paid to employees as salaries. This is going back a few years ago. I asked them, I said, why are you looking at setting up in Fiji a call center? They said, well, are you in the right time zone? We're exactly 12 hours ahead of Greenwich Mean Time, and so it fits in well with other countries. Number two, the infrastructure is reasonably okay in terms of the ICT connectivity. Number three, apparently we have neutral accents. So if they go and set up a call center, say in India or Philippines, which is generally where they do, they literally spend millions of dollars to get Indians and Filipinos to change their accents so some Australian or some British person or some American can actually understand them. So we have neutral accents, so we need to take advantage of it. But call center is not the only thing. There is a person who set up a business in Lautoka, and he's using Fijian accountants and tech, people with accounting qualifications to file tax returns of Australians. So they're doing the filing of tax returns, they fill out all the forms, and they're submitting it from Fiji. So we see a huge potential for us to get into that space, because obviously we have a lot of accountants, we have CPA qualifications, and they can do that from here, and they'll be very high-paying jobs. So what we've done, we've actually expanded the scope of ICT for you to be able to get, various tax breaks. If you just go to, maybe even if you go to the top floor of this building and look towards Mark Street and Cumming Street, or if you go to Tapu's, and you look at those buildings, it's very ugly, very dirty, has not been upgraded for quite some time. And I'm sure the Suva City Council agrees with that. So what we've actually done, we've provided an incentive. So if you, for example, upgrade or modernize your buildings, you've invested up to $1 million, you'll qualify for 25% investment allowance or 125% tax deduction. So that's what we've, it's a new incentive to do that. Of course, we like people to, for example, build wheelchair access in terms of being disabled friendly, etc. The other thing is also, Fiji will be hosting the Asian Development Bank annual meeting next year in May. It's the first time it's coming to the Pacific. It's a big deal. We'll have something like 4,000 to 4,500 people descending on Nandi for a week. Enormous exposure for us. So what we're saying, if you want to sponsor the event, because we have to bear certain expenses, and I urge all business people, you can sponsor that. I've already got one company that says they want to contribute about, I think, $25,000 towards it. Then a minimum contribution of $10,000, you get 150% tax deduction. That's one incentive. Now, we're also talking to ADB and various other stakeholders about electric buses. I think electric buses will be good on, at least for the time being, on the tar-seal roads. So if you buy electric buses, there's a 55% capital deduction for that. If you set up an electric charging station, if you invest minimum of $100,000, you get various, you get 5% subsidy for the setup of electric charging stations. We want to get into that space, reduce our carbon footprint, have a, of course, ensure that we have cleaner environment and contribute towards our stated objective of reducing our carbon footprint by 30% by 2030. The importation of things like kiwi fruits and strawberries, etc., a few years ago used to be 32% duty. We brought it down to 15, then we brought it down to 5, and now we've zero rated it. So you don't pay any duty whatsoever, and hopefully the people importing it will actually pass that on to you, and they should pass it on to you. Of course, we've got the Economic Intelligence Unit and the Fiji Commerce Commission. They'll be looking at the pricing, and they should come down. Of course, we're working in collaboration with Fiji Revenue Customs Services. Tea, we had a duty of 5%, that's been zero rated now. Most people drink tea, so we have zero rated duty on tea. Carbonated drinks, as you know, we had a higher excise duty on carbonated drinks to deter people from drinking carbonated drinks, your fizzy drinks. What we found, though, a lot of the businesses started buying cheaper, imported carbonated drinks. So we've actually put a specific duty now on $2 per litre on imported carbonated and sweetened drinks. And of course, cigarettes and alcohol, the excise duty has gone up by 15%. Plastic bag levy has gone up from 10 cents to 20 cents. Of course, this is to change people's behavior, the way we view bags. As I mentioned to some people last night in Vunimono High School last night, before the days of plastic, I remember as a kid, when we used to go to the market, you had those reusable bags. And they used to make out from various, big sacks. And they call it jolly. And that's what they used to take to the market. It's a reusable bag. A lot of women's groups are now making those bags. So the idea is for people to use those bags instead of plastic bags. In the meantime, of course, if you go to the market now, you don't pay the 20 cents levy. The 20 cents levy uses the plastics only in pharmacies, service stations and supermarkets. But we have said that there will be a complete ban on the uses of plastic bags, single-use plastic bags from 2020, because it is causing huge problems for us. Now, as you know that we have an age restriction on vehicles. If you import second-hand vehicles into Fiji, they cannot be any older than 5 years. So what a lot of the car dealers were doing, they're importing cars that was like 4 years and 11 months old, 4 years and 10 months old, because obviously it was cheaper. Now, it kind of defeats the purpose too, because the newer the car is, the better the technology is. The better the technology, the greater fuel efficiency, less carbon footprint. So we've said now to incentivize car dealers to bring in newer cars, that if you bring a car that's 2 years or younger, instead of paying 32% duty, you'll pay 15% duty. So in that way, people are incentivized to buy newer cars. Similarly, taxis used to pay 15% duty. So now if they bring in cars that are 2 years or younger and use it as taxi, they will pay 7.5% duty on the importation of those cars for the users as taxis. Now, very quickly, I want to show you what do you mean the effects of 9 years straight growth. A lot of people say, oh, we've grown before. Yes, we've grown before. But we've never had 9 years straight of growth. You see, Fiji, when it sort of grew 1 year, did not grow the next year, had negative growth, you can see the size of our GDP, 0.2 billion. Then it went up to 1 billion after 10 years. Another 10 years went up to 2 billion. Another 10 years went to 3.6 billion. Another 10 years went up from 3.6 to 5.6 billion. Then suddenly it's gone up to 11.3. Why? Because we've had 9 years of consecutive growth. In other words, every year for the 9 years it has grown. The impact of that is that your GDP increases. So there's more wealth being created. If you have 1 year of growth, the following year it goes into negative growth, you're still crawling back all the time. You take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. 2 steps forward, maybe half a step back. Next time you take 3 steps forward, you take 2 steps back the following year. See, there's no momentum. So the impact of the 9 years of straight growth means our GDP is now worth $11.3 billion. Now, this is what it is. Now you can see over here, we had Cyclone Winston that cost us $1.3 billion loss from our GDP. That's a lot of money. But despite that setback, we still grew by 0.4. You can imagine what our GDP size would have been, if this growth, if Winston had not taken place. If Winston had not taken place, this bar probably be at least up till there, and then our GDP would have been much larger too. So it would have become a lot more wealthier. That's why we don't like cyclones. It kills people, it draws us back as far as our growth is concerned. We expected to grow projected to grow for another 3 years. So obviously it's very, very critically important for us to maintain the momentum and to ensure that there's consistency in policies. The same policies follow through. Otherwise you'll get that lack of confidence within the system. Now, what has been the effect on jobs? You can see unemployment obviously has dropped to 4.5%. It's the lowest now it's been in 20 years. 40,000 jobs have been created in the last 5 years. Now, one of the ways of measuring also this, for example, this year, 2017, you can see there's been 20,795 new compulsory membership in FNPF for that year alone. But if you take out the number of withdrawals from the FNPF, it's been about 7,800. So your net FNPF compulsory membership has grown by 13,000 in 2017. The other way of measuring things, of course, is up till 2014, the Reserve Bank of Fiji used to look at all the job ads in the Fiji Times. That's how they also measure how many new jobs are coming through. But of course, not everybody advertises only in Fiji Times. So from 2014, they started looking at the Fiji Sun also. And of course, because of the growth, you can see a lot more jobs have come into play. So these are the sort of positive spin-offs of having 9 years of consecutive growth, because it creates a lot more jobs within the system. Now, people talk about, inflation, how much price of goods go up by. Now, we are a country that's very much dependent on many of our sources of goods and commodities from overseas. Now, everything that I'm holding, that projector, that screen, the shoes that I'm wearing, your watches that you are wearing, the gel you have in your hair, the sunglasses this lady has on her head, none of this is made in Fiji. It's all made from overseas. And I'll go on to the next slide as to what is the impact of that. But the fact of the matter is that when you measure inflation, you have a basket of goods, everyday users goods that people spend on a daily basis. And then you look at the rate of inflation. Part of that basket of goods is also alcohol, tobacco and kava. Let me show you the impact of that. In 2015, inflation was 1.6% overall. Alcohol, tobacco and kava contributed 0.6%. 1% was everything else, excluding those three things. So in that mix is also fuel. In that mix is also things like flour that you use to make bread. You make your bambakau, you make your rotis, you make your cakes, etc. So that's part of that. 2016, this is after, of course, Winston, 3.9% inflation rate. Alcohol, tobacco and kava contributed 2.7% because kava, you know, shot through the roof. Till today, kava costs $140 a kilo. The other goods and services contribute only 1.2%. Today, it's 4.6, 1.7% by these three items, 2.9 is here. Why? Because the price of fuel has now gone up to about $62, $64 a barrel. Only a few months ago, it used to be about 40, in fact, it was about $38 a barrel. In 2009, the fuel was $140 a barrel. So we are completely what we call price takers. The example that I've given is this. A lot of people say, oh, why doesn't government reduce the price of flour? We price control flour. So if, for example, to make flour, you need wheat. We don't grow wheat in Fiji. Where do we get wheat from? Predominantly Australia. There are two companies that make flour in Fiji, FMF, Punja and Sons. So when they go out to the Australian Wheat Board and they buy wheat, they dictate the price. They simply are the price takers. So assuming if the price of wheat has gone up by another $20 a ton, they have to pay that. So when they bring the wheat to Fiji, you have those huge silos, they store it there, then they grind the wheat and they make the flour. The moment they make the flour, that's when we price control it, because we know flour is a basic item. So we price control flour. So we say to FMF and Punja and Sons, you can make only this much percentage of a margin, because they give us how much they buy it for, they give their cost, they say this is the cost of labor, cost of electricity, cost of marketing, cost of transportation to the supermarket. Then the Commerce Commission looks at all and then says, okay, this is how much we'll allow you to make. That's how we price control things. Of course, we don't price control everything, but the basic food items we price control. Same way we price control rice, we price control cooking oil, because people use that. We don't, of course, go and price control shampoos. So it's the basic food items that we price control. So to say that, oh, because of government the price of flour has gone up, no. It's because of the world commodity price. And the same thing tomorrow, when the price of fuel will go up to $80 a barrel, hopefully it won't, if it goes up, we simply have to take the price. We have no control whatsoever. We price control it. You know, every quarter, you see the Commerce Commission says, okay, the price of fuel has gone up or has come down. Now, what affects the price of fuel? How much production the Middle Eastern countries have, or other countries. If there's a war going on there, if Donald Trump's decide to make friends with somebody, or make a foe with somebody, or there's a winter in the Northern Hemisphere. You'll always notice this. Whenever there's a very cold winter in the Northern Hemisphere, the price of fuel will go up. Because Europeans demand more fuel and the North Americans demand more fuel to keep warm. So the price of fuel will go up, and we pay for it. So that's the reality as far as inflation is concerned. Now, foreign reserves, as I mentioned earlier on, a lot of the things that we have in Fiji, of course, it comes from overseas. The examples that I gave, the hair gel, the watches, what have you, all of these things over here, these lights, depending on what you're getting. These chairs may be made from overseas, come from overseas. This shirt that Kamal is wearing, maybe it's sewn here, but the fabric comes from overseas. So when we buy these things from overseas, they don't sell it to us in Fijian dollars, they sell it to us in Japanese yen, in US dollars, in euros. So you need enough foreign currency to trade. You need enough foreign currency to trade. If you don't have enough foreign currency, they'll say, oh, this country is going bankrupt, because they can't trade. The Reserve Bank will put restrictions on you to take out funds, etc. So, international benchmark, IMF, World Bank, all of them will tell you that this is the number of months, that if you should have really about 4 months worth of foreign currency to be seen to be healthy. That's 4 months of trading you should be able to do on the reserves that you have. You can see how much foreign currency we had. We had about $515 million here, and this over here is the number of months that's against it. You can see our foreign reserves have gone up to $2.1 billion. It's quite significant compared to what it was. But what is also really interesting is this. Because the economy is growing, And because more people have more money in their pockets, there is a huge demand for goods. So because now more people are buying cars, we see a lot of cars on the road, obviously there's a huge demand on foreign reserves. Most of the second-hand cars come from Japan. So Japanese yen is used. So I'll give you a classic example. You see over here, we had $1.3 billion. If you track that across, that's about 4.8 months worth of trading. Okay, at $1.3 billion. We have $2.1 billion, almost double, but we have 4.9 months worth. Why? Because we are buying more goods from overseas. I'll give you a classic example. Every day, somebody in Fiji is getting connected to the electricity grid. The moment you connect somebody to the electricity grid, they'll want to buy a fridge. They want to buy a microwave. They want to buy a TV. They may want to buy another TV. They want to buy a stereo, maybe a washing machine. None of these things are made in Fiji. So obviously there's more pressure on foreign reserves. So as your economy gets bigger, you'll have more demand. As people get more wealthier, there'll be more demand for goods and services that's generally not made here. A lot of people talk about debt in Fiji without understanding debt. Now debt, there are two ways of measuring debt. One is what you call the dollar value, what you call the nominal value of debt. So like for example, if I say have $100, and that's the value of my GDP, my total wealth of mine, $100. I go out to a bank and borrow $20. So the nominal value or the dollar value of my debt is $20. But as a percentage of my GDP is 20%. 20 over 100 is 20%. Now assuming I now have $500 and I go and borrow 2.5 times more than what I borrowed, I now go and borrow $50. So you would say my debt has increased from $20 to $50. But because I now earn $500, and even though I borrowed $50, as a percentage it's only 10%. So in other words, the more money you have, the more you can borrow. The same way a person who earns $30,000 a year, the bank will hardly give him a loan for $1 million a year, a $1 million loan. We say you don't have the capacity to pay. But maybe if I earn $500,000 or $750,000 a year, the bank will easily give me $1 million. We have the capacity to pay. The question, of course, that we need to ask is why is the government borrowing? Are they going to borrow money to build a fancy auditorium that may be used only once a year, a one-off expenditure? That's not good debt. But if you're going to borrow, for example, to connect people to electricity, build a 4-lane road to increase your productive capacity, connect more people, for example, to housing, get them more housing, that's what you call productive use of debt. Of course, in the same way as I've said, that the 4-lane road that's being built at the airport, the future generations no longer have to build that. We've done it for them now. If they were to do it themselves 10 years down the track, it probably cost them double the amount than what it costs us today. So you need to think about the future and build your productive capacity now. Now, if you look at it from a percent of GDP, our debt has decreased to 47%. Of course, over here we've been paying for Winston. If Winston did not occur, the line is over here would be much shorter. As a percentage, as a dollar value, our debt is now $5.1 billion, Fijian dollars. Now, I have to say this, and my staff must be sick and tired of me saying this, they go through all the sessions. But I have to tell people this because they don't simply understand debt. When Fiji became independent, when the Ratumara government was put in place, all governments in the world, nearly all governments in the world borrow because they run what we call fiscal deficits, budget deficits. So Ratumara government borrowed money, right? Then the Ratumara government was replaced by, after 17 years, replaced by the 4-week-old Bavanda government. They, when they come in as government, they have to repay the debt of the Ratumara government. They may have incurred some debt in that 4 weeks time too. Then they were removed by Rambuka. So Rambuka government from 87 up till the SVT government would have incurred debt also, but they also have to pay the debt of the Bavanda government and the Ratumara government. Then you had the Chaudhry government for 1 year. They borrow money also, they have to pay the debt of the Rambuka government, the Bavanda government, Ratumara government. Then you have the Ganase government. They borrow money also. So they have to pay the debts of everybody else. By this stage, probably most of the Ratumara debt is paid, because normally the sovereign debt is about, 25, 30-year debt, or loans you have. So when the Bainimarama government was appointed, they inherited a debt of $2.8 billion from the previous governments. So if you add that debt together with the debt that the Bainimarama government and the Fiji First government has incurred, our total debt is $5.1 billion. That's how the system works. Now, we are very fortunate that in Fiji's case, none of the governments have actually failed to repay a debt. Some countries, governments actually fail to repay their debt. They get a very bad rating, etc. Irrespective of whichever government came in, the subsequent government has always repaid the debt, because it is not the Ratumara government debt, it's the Fijian government debt. The people you borrow money from, they don't care who's the Prime Minister. They know it's your country, you have to pay the debt. So we've never defaulted on any of our debts, which is a good place to be in. So that's the debt situation in Fiji. Now, let's look at other countries. What percentage of the GDP is in debt? Japan has a debt to GDP ratio of 239.2%. Nobody in Fiji says the Japanese economy is failing, they're in trouble. The Singaporean debt to GDP ratio is 112%. USA, 107.4%. This is the debt situation of a lot of the countries we've listed. These countries, of course, are comparable to us: Maldives, Seychelles, Nauru, Mauritius, Tuvalu, Samoa, PNG, Marshall Islands, Vanuatu. That's the debt to GDP ratio. Now, what does it mean in dollar terms? How much is in dollar terms? Because people in Fiji like dollar terms. This is US dollar. Japan's overall debt is $11.8 trillion. Singapore is $332.7 billion. Now, you see, the reason why Singapore is at 112%, even though their debt is only $332.7 billion, is obviously their economy is smaller. Like the example that I gave. If your economy is smaller and you borrowed more, as a percentage of GDP, it would be higher. But in dollar value terms, it's less. So you look at USA. USA percent of GDP is 107.4%, but the total debt is $19.9 trillion. These are all in US dollars, by the way. It's in US dollars. $9.9 trillion is the most debt-ridden country in terms of dollar value. Now, the point being is that even though the debt is higher than Japan by about $8 trillion, as a percent of GDP it's lower. We sit here, 2.47 billion US dollars, about 47% of our GDP. So dollar value, that's the debt. You can go and Google it, it's all there on the Google and all the Reserve Bank websites, etc. You'll find all of that information there. I went to Mauritius a few years ago, about 18 months ago, very similar to Fiji. But they did something that we are doing, but they did on a much grander scale. They decided to get infrastructure everywhere, 4-lane roads, modernized everything. The sugar-based economy, they've got into tourism now in a big way. But the advantage Mauritius has over Fiji is that Mauritius is a slightly bigger population, it's about 1.2, 1.3 million people. Just to do the comparison, the land size of of Viti Levu is 10,000 square kilometers of Viti Levu. Overall, Fiji is about 18,000 square kilometers. Land size of Viti Levu is 10,000 square kilometers. Mauritius is about 2,000. So much smaller than us. 1/5 smaller than Viti Levu. But the population is about 1.3 million people. What they did was they invested very heavily in infrastructure. They set up, for example, ICT parks. They set up business parks. They went internationally and marketed themselves. They said, look, Africa is not necessarily a safe place, but it's the fastest growing continent. A lot of young people. Why don't you be based in Mauritius to service Africa? And it's precisely what happened. They modernized the airport. They did everything, made it attractive. They went to India, got 3 or 4 Indian hospitals, did partnerships, PPPs, etc., set up hospitals. They went to the rich Africans and said, look, don't go to India for open heart surgery. Come to Mauritius. Same people are here. And we throw in a 1-week holiday package, tourism, medical tourism. And they're doing quite well. But their debt level has gone up to $7.5 billion US dollars. But it's good debt because they built it for productive capacity. So in the same way we're doing a 4-lane road all the way to Nosori. Once you do the road, it makes Suva a lot more attractive. A lot more people can come, and also it means a lot more people will be willing to go and build their houses in Nosori and beyond. So the land value of those places will go up. So this is the kind of what we call increasing your productive capacity by spending in the right places. Very quickly, this is the debts we have. We've listed here for you where we are borrowing from overseas. Where is our debt situation? So, as at May 2018, $4.8 billion here. Now, generally we have a mix. Nearly 30% of our debt is from agencies or institutions offshore. 70% of our debt is onshore. In other words, we borrowed from private or institutions in Fiji. We like to keep that mix because if you have too much debt offshore, you're prone to foreign currency fluctuations. If you borrow in US, the US dollar changes, you'll have to pay more, etc. So we keep about 70% of our debt onshore. Now, there's a lot of talk about Chinese debt and Chinese taking over. It's a lot of nonsense. It's actually quite stupid to say what has been said. But this is the debt. So we owe Asian Development Bank $348.5 million. International Fund for Agriculture is $2.2 million. World Bank, $148.6 million. JICA, $11.5 million. Exim Bank of China, $516.0 million. Global Bond, $416.2 million. That's our total exposure to foreign debt. And that's what it comes up to. Now, there has been, for example, people have said, I've been asked in a number of gatherings prior to this, so I just want to clarify it before people ask me questions. Will the Chinese take over our ports and jetties? No, they can't. Normally that happens, for example, is mortgage. So if I go to a bank and I want to buy a house, the bank lends me money to buy the house, it'll take a mortgage over my property. The reason why I take a mortgage over my property, in other words, security over my property, in the event I don't pay the debt, then they can go and take my house, sell it, and then get their money back. That's how simply a mortgage works. So the Chinese loan, the last loan we borrowed for them was in 2012. There was a small Chinese loan that the Garase government borrowed for the ICT upgrade, the ICT center up in Berkeley Crescent area. Now, when the Beni Marama government came in, they borrowed from the Chinese Exim Bank of China for 7 projects. I can tell you what they are. The tar sealing of the Nambuwalu Draketi Road, tar sealing of Buddha Bay Road, tar sealing of Sawani Seria Road, tar sealing of the Singatoka Valley Road, tar sealing in the bridge built in Boto in Ba, and of course the Rewai flats, the PRB flats, and also the subdivision in Tathirua for Housing Authority. They are the 7 projects that we've borrowed money for from the Chinese, and we have not borrowed money from them since 2012. Do they have a mortgage over any properties? No. Do they have a mortgage over the road of Nambuwalu Draketi? No. So normally all of these institutions, the World Bank, ADB, they've lent to us what we call sovereign debt. So they know that a country, that's the way the system works. If there's a country debt, the country has to pay the loan. So it's what you call a sovereign debt. So government guarantees, etc. are there. So you don't actually mortgage physical assets. Quickly, this issue that people need to understand. From 1980 to 2006, which is about 27 years, all the governments then combined spend $3.5 billion in capital expenditure. In other words, building things. And the debt that accumulated as a result of that was $2.6 billion. From 2007 till now, 11 years, we've actually spent double the amount in capital expenditure, building things. But the debt has increased by 2.3 billion as opposed to the 2.6. The reason why that is because in these years, 27 years, when the government spent money on building things, every dollar they spent, 76 cents they borrowed. Every dollar we have spent in building things, we borrowed only 36 cents. Why? Because we have savings. You see, this is what you call operating savings over here. Or what is operating savings? Operating savings is essentially the amount of money you collect, the amount of money you spend in operating your organization, operating government, then you have a profit or a surplus at the end of it, a surplus. So our surplus, as you can see, has been increasing. We expect a surplus of about $1 billion this year. So of course that's your operating expenditure. So when you want to build, you use your surplus first, and then you go and borrow to build. So as a result of that, we have been spending only 36 cents in a dollar for capital expenditure because our savings has increased, which is a good space to be in. So we've done lots of creative things in respect of how we can save. So for example, we lease vehicles, we no longer buy vehicles, we lease photocopiers, we no longer buy photocopiers, so we spend more money on hard infrastructure. That's how we're able to be creative about it. We've also sharpened our expenses too on a daily basis. Now we spend about 40% of the budget on capital expenditure. So ladies and gentlemen, again, it's a huge family focus for the budget. You will find, if you go to the website, you'll find all of this information. You'll firstly find this budget book that's there. Now this budget book has a line-by-line expenditure item for everything. So if I open, for example, this page, it says Ministry of Housing and Community Development, Program 1, Activity 1, it says over here, establishment of divisional offices, $300,000. So you can come back and track where the divisional offices will be built, how will they build, where will they build, all that information is there. So you can track that line by line. You'll also find what I mentioned to you about the ECAL information. You'll also find this. We put out these flyers in the Fiji Sun. Rural electrification projects. How will that money be spent? So for example, extension of grid. It says over here, let me take one. Tonge Village Bar, number of applicants 16, the cost is $24,000. Harry Charan and Sanjay Prasad, Vuna Kawan Rao subdivision, Koravuto Nandi, 13 people, cost is $34,000. These people in this year will get connected to the grid. So I've had people actually call me up last year saying, hey, my place is on the list, when am I getting the electricity? So it creates a new level of accountability. So you've got the electricity, Water Authority of Fiji, which tells you where the new tanks are going, which village, what's the size of the tanks. This is the Fiji Roads Authority, how will the money be spent, gives you specific projects. Then of course you've got the respective ministries. You've got the respective ministries in the social services sector, you've got the infrastructure sector, you've got the economic services sector and general administration. All of this is available actually online. You can go and have a look at it, and of course we've got hard copies available. So ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of the presentation. I just wanted to sort of say what we're doing is that we're building on the past budgets. In fact, many of the things that we have done, we kind of predicted about 3 years ago. If people were listening to us carefully, they would have seen this on the horizon. The same way we've made a number of announcements now, that if people think carefully about it, it'll probably come in the next few years' time. Because it's a case of building blocks. And of course the economy is on a track for growth for 9 consecutive years, and we want people to be focused on that. And of course our fiscal position remains quite strong. I'd like to now open up the floor for any questions you may have, any queries in respect to the presentation. There's somebody going around with a mic. Please feel free to ask any question. Nothing is too difficult or too silly. Please feel free to do so. Thank you.